Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my series on healing the divine masculine, my personal journey. This is David. I'll start with my introduction. This is a series based on my personal life journey. I've experienced a lot and learned a lot in 67 years on this planet. I wanted to share what I've learned with younger men so that they may benefit. And we all have a story to tell, and we could rewrite our story. We all have our own path. Some of this series can pertain to the divine feminine, and I hope you enjoy this journey with me. Becoming the Seeker is the topic of today's presentation. This is my story of becoming the seeker of ancient wisdom, truth, and purpose. The topics that I will cover in this presentation are what is awakening, my awakening, the cruise, psychics and mediums, shamanism, visiting ancient sites, coming home to face the demons, the call for Mother Ayahuasca, the baptism, transmutation, and the end of a phase. So, what is awakening? This is one definition that I found. Spiritual awakening is a simultaneous increase of expanding consciousness that occurs when our spiritual energetic bodies connect into our physical bodies. Generally, the catalyst for spiritual awakening is discovered through the process of progressive Kundalini activation that starts in the base of our spine and moves the intelligent energies up the spine and into the crown. As a human being undergoes the awakening process, which can progress gradually over many years, that person shifts into perceptions of higher consciousness, which can include increased awareness of energy in the environment, perceiving multidimensional realities, sensing extra-dimensional entities, and feeling a direct communion with God and the interconnected energy that exists between all things. It's a very complete description. All of the things in this list I have experienced many times. As this process progresses, you become consciously aware of them. So many people speak of their awakening, their Kundalini awakening, etc. Some people have something very profound happen in their life. For others, like myself, this happens over a period of time. Looking back on it now, I can see how many threads of this lifetime came together to create this awakening process. As I discussed in my last video, I lived in a lot of places. The longest single place was Italy for 7 years, 1999 to 2006. I felt very much at home there. I was revisiting a place with which I was very familiar. I understand that now. I can now understand that I was helping to heal that part of the world, and she was helping to heal me. She was preparing me for the next phase. And from Italy, I went to Panama for a year, then back to the New York, New Jersey area in 2007. In 2008, when my wife and I divorced, shortly thereafter, I met a woman who was a mystic, for lack of a better term. She could read chakras and began to introduce me to some new ideas. She was very cautious about it all. She was the first of a number of single mothers raising their sons that would come into my life over the course of 10 years. The universe just keeps presenting scenarios to you until you get it. The seeds of this part of the journey were being planted. And I ended up naming it my self-aware journey. In November 2009, my mother went into the hospital. Her heart was giving out. It was a Thursday night I got the phone call. And Friday I flew into Michigan and met with her in the ICU, where she looked around and she said to me, "I'm never getting out of here." I still remember that moment. It was about 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon, November 2009. "I'm never getting out of here." She knew, and I've come to learn we always know. I had to make a decision, and I decided, with support from the doctor, to move her into hospice. She quietly and painlessly passed 10 days later. While she was going through the dying process, which the minister told me was normal, I was intuitively guided to assist her. This was done by just telling her soul that it is okay to leave the body. I stood at the bedside and repeated this for long periods over the course of 3 days. I later found out that this practice of assisting the dying is an ancient shamanic practice. We buried her a few days later, and with our small family, turned it into a celebration of life, even adding sewing pins to the coffin and grave. Because our mother was a seamstress, and my sister and I grew up with sewing pins everywhere. The lady from the funeral home laughed and liked what we were doing. This 2 week episode became a very profound part of my journey. First of all, to watch someone die consciously, to be the observer of that was very profound. Of course, you got all the feelings going on too because it's your mother, but when you kind of step back, which I was able to do once in a while, and just observe, it was fascinating. And I could see myself going in the same way, where you basically, and I did a video on this called Conscious Living, Conscious Dying, where you just die consciously. The next big step in the awakening occurred in January 2nd, 2010, 6 weeks after my mother died. I decided to quit drinking alcohol. I had been drinking steadily since age 15, and at times it was not pretty. The first couple of months were tough. This was a huge step and marked a major turning point in my life. Looking back on it now, it feels like a cord is cut when the mother of the son passes. I hope all sons do not have to wait this long. And this is a problem I've come to know in my studies. This is a problem with having no rite of passage from boyhood to manhood, which I'll discuss in a later video. Now I want to go into the cruise. So January 2nd, 2010, I stopped drinking. And at that point, I began absorbing information on various spiritual topics. This led to the publishing company Hay House and their cadre of authors, which then led to going on the Hay House I Can Do It Caribbean cruise in February 2011, just a year after my mother died. The speakers were all Hay House authors, and this opened me up to a whole new world in many directions. This is the list of speakers, which included Wayne Dyer. He was the only one that I had ever heard of. And I got to meet him in the elevator one day. He walked in, and we're about the same height, so that was pretty cool. And we talked for a little while because he grew up near Detroit like I did, and had a similar background with regards to not knowing his father, because I knew his story. So we talked about it a little bit. There was also Carolyn Meese, who's a medical intuitive, John Holland, who's an incredible medium, Brian Weiss, who's done a lot of work with past lives, wrote a lot of books about it. I read them all. Denise Lynn, who does a lot of work in the shamanism. She wrote a great book about vision quests. Greg Braden on science and spirituality. I've read all of his books. And then Sonia Choquette, who's an intuitive, and she wrote a great book called Trusting Your Vibes. Wayne Dyer is the only name I knew, as my mother gave me his second book, Pulling Your Own Strings, about 30 years earlier. But it took a while for that to sink in. I wasn't ready for it back in my young 20s. I bought so many books and tapes on that cruise that I had to buy another suitcase to get them home. We stopped in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I bought another suitcase while we were off the boat. After the cruise, I returned home and began reading and listening to the suitcase full of books and tapes. I was also listening to a couple of nightly internet radio shows that introduced me to even more people in this spiritual movement. I was in full seeker absorption sponge mode for the next few years. This led me to psychics and mediums, and I think a lot of people go through this phase as part of their process, their awakening process. I started scheduling sessions with psychics and mediums, and I had a couple of very good sessions. Some of them were very informative. Karen Curry, who has written books on a concept known as human design, did a session with me. We looked at my chart. While she was looking at it, she called me a psychic machine. It was very interesting. And this was January 2013. I still have the recording. And Daniel McKinnon, who wrote a book called Soul Contracts, helped me to understand my relationship with my mother, my childhood, and the concept of abandonment, which I talked about in the last video, and how abandonment impacted my relationships with women. This was eye-opening. when she talked about that, the fact that I had to abandon them before they abandoned me. That's how deep the abandonment wound went. Basically, self-sabotaging is what we're doing. I also had someone do my numerology chart in December 2012, which was interesting. Later on, then in July 2014, I went to Peru for 2 weeks on a guided tour led by Greg Braden. Now, I had never heard of Greg until I got on that cruise, and I was absorbing all of his books. And I don't know exactly what guided me to this trip, but it was a very interesting trip. It was my first time on a group trip like this. Also, my first time to see sacred sites like Machu Picchu, which is in the background there. There's 44 people in all. I still remember this: 33 women, 11 men. We had a really good group. Um, the day after returning from Peru, and I already had, of course, already had all this planned out. I had taken a job in Portland, Oregon. So the day after I came back from Peru, I jumped in my car and started driving across the country from New Jersey, Cranford, New Jersey, to Portland, Oregon. And I spent a year living in Hillsboro, just outside of Portland. And I never really got comfortable there. I felt very far away. It's a very interesting feeling. I did find a wonderful group of people at a place. It's called the Center for the Healing Arts in Hillsboro, where I was living. And these people introduced me to more aspects of spirituality and shamanism. And we also practiced a lot, which was really. At the Healing Arts Center, there was, for example, a weekly meditation class on Wednesdays, which was wonderful. That was one time. One time I was in a class with 12 women, which was fascinating. There was monthly classes with an intuitive named Elaine, who was really, really good. She was fascinating. Always had good topics. There's also a gentleman who had a men's group, and so I went to that. I went to my first drum circles, and I actually made my first drum. Elaine and her husband had a little groups. There was about 4 or 5 of us, and we all made drums one day, which was really, really cool. Um, I also attended my first and only sweat lodge just before I left Oregon. It was a couple of ladies that did a regular sweat lodge based on the Lakota tradition, and I did do a lot of traveling along the entire Oregon coast. I actually covered the whole coast from north to south, and even went into Northern California and to see Jedediah Smith's Redwood State Park, which is an amazing place to see coastal redwood trees. That's what's in the picture there. That's actually the entrance, and it was just like walking back in time. Of course, redwoods go all the way back to the Jurassic period, so it's just fascinating to feel the energy around them. I love them. I just love them. Um, it was during this time that the connection to Mother Earth and the concept of shamanism were really taking hold. I was doing a lot of hiking around Multnomah Falls. That's the picture you see there, and spent my weekends along the Oregon coast, just exploring all these places. It was also during this time, which was 2014 to 15, that I went to Sedona and worked with a shaman named Gregory Drambour. I have no idea what guided me to him, but I'm very grateful for that guidance. He took me out into the desert and we did some great healing work together. Gregory had been practicing for a very long time. He was trained by he called them the holy men from the Dakotas. I learned a lot from Greg, and he helped me see, for example, Charlotte, a spirit guide she's a little girl who is here to remind me to have fun. It was great. And on one trip to Sedona in 2015, I released an earthbound spirit with my flute, which is my talisman. I have this little 5-hole flute that I still carry around with me. And I was sitting by either Bell Rock or Cathedral Rock, and I could tell that there was a trapped spirit there. A murder had happened, and there was a trapped spirit there. And I started playing my flute. I played it slow at first. I still remember this. And as the spirit released, I started to picking up the pace with the music. It's quite fascinating. Um, So visiting some more ancient sites. I left Oregon in 2015 and spent a year in Greensboro, North Carolina. I never got comfortable there. In fact, I never unpacked. I lived in a furnished apartment for a year. In May of 2016, I returned to Michigan after being gone for a couple of decades. In March of 2017, I went to Egypt and Jordan. I was 2 weeks in Egypt and about a week in Jordan. And then in December 2017, I went to Cambodia to see Angkor Wat. So all of these ancient sites and very sacred places. And then in September 2018, I returned for the second time to Italy for a visit, and actually went up into the Dolomites. I went to Venice, a few other places, and I also saw some friends, old friends there. The Dolomites were quite spectacular. It's the end of the Alp range between Italy and Austria. So visiting ancient sites, Egypt was a real eye opener. Everything was so big on a scale just impossible to behold. The Great Pyramid, which is in the right hand part of that picture there, the second pyramid is the one on the left. And then the Colossi of Memnon, which are these two giant granite statues. And the man walking there in front is actually a guy from Australia who I was friends with on the trip. And he was a very large gentleman, and he looks very small in this picture next to these giant granite statues. It's just hilarious. We hung out together a lot. On my When I returned, I gave a presentation of the trip to my colleagues, and I concluded it by saying, I believe that we as humans have devolved as we could not build these things today. That was basically the last thing I said after a 90-minute presentation on the trips to Egypt and Jordan. The most powerful moment was when I walked inside the king's chamber. The feeling of that was beyond words. It was just so powerful. I actually grabbed one of the guys on the trip and by the shoulders and I said, "Can you believe where we are?" Yeah, the king's chamber, quite fascinating. Highly recommend it. Jordan with Petra and Cambodia with Angkor Wat were impressive and a lot of fun. Petra was a place I had to visit. For some reason, I had to go there. When I was telling people that I was going on this trip, I remember saying, I'm going to Egypt and Jordan and I have to see Petra, quote unquote. That's the building they call the Treasury. Today we weren't allowed to go inside there. It's unfortunate, but just phenomenal. This is when you come right out of the gorge. This is the scene from the Indiana Jones movie. You come out of the gorge after walking a couple miles, and this is what you see, and it's just spectacular. I don't remember what motivated me to go to Cambodia just 9 months after Egypt and Jordan, but I know that my soul knows. For some reason, I came back and I just planned another trip. Something that had to happen that year of 2017. Um, Coming home to face the demons. So, as stated earlier in May of 2016, I returned to Detroit, Michigan, and I took a contract with a bank in Troy, very, very close to where we grew up as kids in Madison Heights. In 2017, upon returning from Egypt, I started dating again, and I decided to start drinking alcohol again. So it was red wine. I could drink, quote unquote, socially. And of course, I told myself I can handle it. Yeah. By the end of 2017, I was drinking a bottle a night, and I began what I now call a dark night of the soul, looking back on it all. In 2018, I stopped dating but kept drinking. So when I went to Egypt, I wasn't drinking. I was just starting to taste red wine. And by the time December 2017, and I went to Cambodia, it was a bottle a night, and I was drinking every night in Cambodia. I would go to the bar, and it was fun because I was talking to a lot of people. The joke in our group in Cambodia was that I knew everybody in the hotel, which was pretty close to true, because I was socializing with everybody. But yeah, I was drinking a lot, and by early 2019, the alcohol was affecting my attitude, my relationships at work. It was really affecting me physically, mentally, and emotionally, and spiritually. But it had a strong grip on me again. And in June of 2019, after arriving back in Michigan for 3 years, almost to the day, At 2 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, I was abruptly released from the contract I was on at the bank after 3 years. Still remember this moment. I went home and went for a long bike ride, which was a daily ritual in those days, anywhere from 10 to 50 miles. 8 days. It was at this time, let me say this, it was at this time, that Friday and over that weekend, that I got the call from Mother Ayahuasca, the energetic call. So 8 days after being released from the bank on Saturday, June 22nd, 2019, I arrived at Rhythmia in Costa Rica to do ayahuasca. All the plans were made within 72 hours of walking out of the bank that previous Friday. I have no idea how I made the decision during those 3 days. I just, it was a total blank how all that happened. I had only heard of Rhythmia once that I remember, and that was a couple of months earlier through a friend I met on the trip to Cambodia. She's from Australia, and she had just been there a couple months earlier, and we were communicating through Facebook at the time. And I ended up returning to Rhythmia in July and December of 2019. So 3 trips within a 6 month period. The journeys were amazing. There's videos on my channel about each of these trips. And the 3 trips to Rhythmia in 2019 marked basically the conclusion of this decade of seeking. And then came the baptism. Then this was I come home from I spent at Christmas time I spent 2 weeks in Costa Rica. The week before Christmas doing ayahuasca, and then the week of Christmas integrating and falling in love with somebody. And I came home after Christmas from Costa Rica and got this crazy idea, which I then acted on January 1st, 2020. I drove up to a place called Lexington, Michigan, which is about 90 minutes to 2 hours north of where I was living. It's a cute little town on Lake Huron with a little beach, and I had visited there many times in the summertime. And on this day, January 1st, it was 31 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind was blowing, and the water was just about as cold. Fortunately, I had been doing cold showers in the mornings for quite some time, being a fan of Wim Hof, the Iceman. And cold showers in Michigan are very easy in the wintertime because there's a lot of cold water. So, standing on this beach in 31-degree weather, I stripped down to my bathing suit and I went into Lake Huron in the cold water. And I was not in there for very long. I did soak my head. It felt like being hit with 1,000 knives. If you can imagine what that feels like. But I called this a baptism and a rite of passage from one phase to the next phase of my journey. And I plan on doing a future video just on the concept of rites of passage, rites of separation, rites of initiation. But that's what this was. This was a baptism and moving from one phase to another in life. Now, I want to talk about the concept of transmutation for a minute. And these two words, and I'm glad I did this because it always confused me, transformation versus transmutation. So transformation, it generally refers to a change in form or state. And the example I came up with was water into ice or gas. But transmutation implies a more profound change, often involving the complete alteration of something into something entirely different, like the alchemical concept of turning lead into gold. I thought this was perfect because this really cleared it up for me. Essentially, transmutation suggests a higher level of change, often with a connotation of elevation or refinement involved. So it's much bigger change than transformation. So I hope this makes sense. It really made a lot of sense for me when I put this together. And why did I do this? Because at the end of the phase, this last 6 months of 19, 3 trips to Rhythmia to do ayahuasca, and the baptism in Lake Huron marked the end of one phase and the beginning of another phase of a journey. But this is not something that's instantaneous, as I was still in a dark place with this dark night of the soul. Mother Ayahuasca had revealed some things to me and pointed out possibilities, but it was up to me to move in those directions. And it took a while, as the alcohol would hold its grip on me for a couple of more years, and contribute to the loss of a relationship with someone very, very precious to me. A very, very painful experience, but looking back on it now, one that was unfortunately necessary. Sometimes that works out that way. So I had to go through more difficult experiences until 2023, when I pulled myself out of this dark night of the soul. And it was mid to late 2023 when the idea of healing the divine masculine first started to gestate inside me. I was reading a lot of books at the time, since 18 months ago or so. Reading a lot of books about, I discovered things like No More Mr. Nice Guy and The Masculine in a Relationship and From the Core and just a whole bunch of them. And at the same time, someone near and dear to me said something to me that confirmed this path. In fact, what she said to me is, "You need to heal the divine masculine." So it all came together there in about mid 2023. And for me, this has been a very long road, and there's still a lot more road to travel. I think, frankly, the road is endless. It's going to go for the rest of the lifetime, and that's okay, and beyond. But the difference between the wounded masculine and the divine masculine is becoming evident in attitude, relationships, my own thoughts, not being triggered by others, and the ability to manage my responses to the outer world. So these are all the topics that I covered. What is an awakening? My awakening, the cruise, psychics and mediums, shamanism, visiting ancient sites, coming home to face the demons, the call for Mother Ayahuasca, the baptism, and the end of the phase. And in summary, I was guided in this direction after the passing of my mother. That's when I thought that cord gets cut. And I hope not all men have to wait that long. But I spent 10 years seeking ancient wisdom and beginning to discover what made me me. Also, I took trips to places I never thought I would visit, made many new acquaintances, and had many new experiences. Drank the ayahuasca, which I had never heard of until recently. Did a lot of recovery of soul fragments. I talked about that in the last video. The traveling around the world, in part, is recovering soul fragments, whether you're conscious of it or not. Your soul knows. Revisiting these places and healing old wounds, and then passing through what ended up being basically a 6-year dark night of the soul, which is going to be its own video. Lastly, I just want to say I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I know it was a lot in a short time. I just wanted to share the awakening journey with you. The next one will be in about a week, and I decided I'm going to do, what is the meaning of divine masculine? I'm going to just give my own meaning. Thought about that the last 48 hours quite a bit because it helps to define things. I'm big on defining things. So I encourage all of you anyone who made it this far, I encourage you to look back on your journey and even write some of it out. And it will help you to understand it at a deeper level. Okay?